First of all, I'd like to point out that Ayurveda is the only system which views the human being as body, mind, and spirit as being connected. Other systems regard the body and the mind separately, and spiritual health isn't always taken into consideration. Spirituality is a very deeply personal issue, but vital to recognize, especially with mental instability. Because when there is a dis-ease, either in the body, in the mind, or in the spiritual self, our whole body our whole person is affected. And so this is critical to understand, because the mind is the bridge between the body and the inner self. So everything that comes into the mind affects it and can have either a positive or a negative effect. And it will affect our physical, mental, and our spiritual self.
Okay, so moving on. What are the things we experience, like loneliness, isolation? What happens?
So mental health, am I operating the slides? I don't see the slide.
I am operating the slides.
Mental health is probably the most pervasive. I can't see them though. Mental health is probably the most pervasive problem that modern society faces, manifesting in all ages, all walks of life, and all creeds and races and color, except that it's very, very prevalent now in the industrial world. And there doesn't seem to be any new approaches to address this problem other than medications and therapy, which is why it is vital, especially now with the COVID crisis, to recognize the importance of integrating, especially now with the COVID crisis, where it's especially important of recognizing the value of Ayurveda and yoga. So modern day living is very complicated now, and the causal factors of mental disturbance are equally complicated. But Ayurveda says that we suffer when we're disconnected from our true nature. We've turned away from natural food, natural childbirth, natural medicine, and natural living in a sustainable way. And despite technology, many people are isolated and don't have any personal connections provided by family and community. And there's a lot of pressure, especially on young people, to be a certain way, to follow trends, and many are left behind. The coronavirus has made life very, very stressful because there are so many uncertainties now about health, about work, and about the future. It's really overwhelming for the mind. But one good thing about it is that it has forced us to stop the madness and given us an opportunity to reevaluate the way we live and to look for quality of life instead of the quantity and the madness that we have for accumulating.
All right, so let's talk about the journey of consciousness.
So this slide is very important to understand. Information comes into the mind through the senses, and the sense of smell, the sense of taste, sight, of touch, and of hearing. And we experience the world through the senses. So it's important to control sensory information, especially if you're already suffering from a mental disorder. We're bombarded these days from all sides with media, with mobile phones, with the internet, and a lot of violence and frankly degrading entertainment, which further disturbs the mind. So this is all seen by the sensate mind, which is called manas, which is like the screen of the computer, but it doesn't process or store information. Information is processed in the discriminating mind. Buddhi is like the processor of the computer. And this is where we judge, where we wonder, where we doubt, and we learn and this is where we learn, and it is our intellect and our intelligence. And then information is stored in the chitta, or in the memory, which is the subconscious mind. And experiences create impressions on the memory, and these are called samskaras. And this is an important part to think about, are the impressions of our life experiences making an impression on our memory. Because not all experiences are good ones. So if we have a traumatic experience, especially before buddhi is developed, a negative impression is made on the sensory mind, on the memory rather, which affects us throughout our lives. Everything has to have a sense of identification to exist, and this is called ahankara. This sense of I is called the ego, and is where we choose to operate at the level of the mind, or to look within to our inner self to experience the deeper aspects of life. Now, jiva is our inner self, which is the real me. We're not the body or the mind. And we always say, this is my body, or this is my house, or this is my mind, because these things belong to me. And the real me is the inner self. So now the mind has constant desires, always seeking pleasure, always wandering here and there. It's never satisfied and believes that this is where happiness lies. So we have to learn to control the mind and bring it to stillness so that we can go beyond it to our inner self and see the mind objectively. And once we see it, we can then heal it and get it under control.
All right, moving on.
Ayurveda also uses the term prajna parada, which means the misuse of intelligence. Now, when we misuse the buddhi, we get sick, not only physically, but mentally. In other words, when we do things that are against our better judgment, there are consequences which affect our well-being. What sets man apart from other living beings is that we have this intelligence, meaning that we can make choices. But this can be our problem. Other creatures live by the laws of nature and by their instincts and have a harmonious relationship with nature. But we, because we can make these choices, will always choose according to the desires of the mind, which is why there is always conflict within us. Now, when buddhi is functioning properly and we use our intelligence with awareness, the subconscious chitta is protected. And in mental disturbances, the buddhi becomes weak and we lose the willpower to resist things which are not right for us.
So let's talk about the gunas and the quality of the mind.
The gunas are subtle forms of vata, pitta, and kapha, but they're in the mind and they're recognized by the qualities of the mind. And they are sattva, rajas, and tamas. And these can get out of balance just in the same way as they do in the body. Now, vata in the mind causes agitation, which manifests as anxiety, PSD, stress, forgetfulness, leading to dementia and those kinds of agitation that we have in the mind. Vata in the mind is common to all of us. When we worry and we can't sleep and we forget things and we can't concentrate. And this is particularly true as we get older. And as we get older, and the vata period of life, which starts around 50, starts to aggravate. So we have to develop strategies to reduce vata in the mind. Multitasking becomes much more difficult. So we have to complete one task before we move on to another, or as best we can. before, and we need to make lists. We have to put things back where we get them from, so we know where to find them. Otherwise, we're spending a lot of time looking for things. And we need to keep a strict routine. Reducing flying is important because when we fly, we get disconnected to the ground. We become ungrounded. And we also have to eat appropriately to our dosha. Now, Rajas gives us motivation and inspiration and is very important. But when it gets aggravated, it creates aggression and violence in us. And tamas gives us grounding and stability and helps us to sleep. But when it's aggravated, it causes inertia and laziness, and it leads to depression. So to maintain and treat mental health conditions, we must increase sattva in the mind and reduce rajas and tamas, because sattva is where we want the mind to be, with the qualities of purity and awareness, love and compassion.
That's a very, very interesting thought. How do we do that? And what are the common mental issues that you see in today's day and age, especially, as you said, with COVID-19?
So now you can see from this slide, you can see how we look at these conditions from a mental perspective. But a big problem today is that these disturbances are often not recognized early enough when they can be corrected. So it's important to build these practices and this awareness into our lives early on, so that we understand what's going on and how our environment affects us. A change in behavior may be regarded as a mood or a phase or feeling down or acting out. And it often this is all it is, but it can become chronic and a way of life and a way of behaving very quickly. Another problem is that medications are used far too readily these days. And these prevent the mind from healing naturally. Mind-altering drugs are difficult to get off, and we always have to remember that, and can often make the situation even worse.
Okay, moving on. We will, there's a concept of Dinacharya in Ayurveda. So let's talk about that a little bit.
So Dinacharya means daily routine. And it's very important because what we do every day is much more important than what we do once in a while. And this shows a sattvic diet. And now a sattvic diet, so we start off with our food, which is very important, both for our body and for our mind and for our way of life. A sattvic diet increases sattva, of course, but we also have to reduce rajas by cutting out rajastic substances like alcohol, meat, garlic and onions, hot spicy food, and stimulants like caffeine and drugs. Now, tamasic foods are lacking in what we call prana, which is the life force. And this comes into us through the breath, it comes into us through the sunshine, and it also comes into us through our food. So food which is old, reheated, stale, high in preservatives, artificial colorings, additives, and our poor quality food will increase tamas in the mind.
Okay. So what I think you already talked about that. You want to say something on anything else on the food?
Food has to be digested properly, and when the digestion is weakened, when the gunas are out of balance. So Agni is the digestive fire and is kindled by digested spices and a proper diet. But it isn't only about the food, it's the way we eat. So very often nowadays we eat when we're doing something else, and that's very bad for the digestion. When we're watching television or looking at the phone, we should concentrate on our meals. And not eat in between meals either, just eat randomly, because when you eat randomly, your digestion is constantly working, and the food never properly digests. So it's like a pot of soup which never really cooks properly. So you always got this food in the stomach which is mixed in with more digested food, mixed in with recently added food, and so nothing really digests properly. And it's also important when we eat, what time we eat. The bulk of food should be taken around the pitta time of day, which is between 10 in the morning and 2 p.m. because this is when Agni is at its height. This is when the digestive fire is most efficient. Now, Ayurveda recognizes ama, which are toxins produced in undigested food, which you get a lot of undigested food, what we just talked about, when you're eating constantly and snacking and not eating at specific times. Ama circulates in the system because it can't be eliminated. And eventually it becomes a thick and slimy substance. And these substances can get trapped in the brain as plaques. And this interrupts neurotransmission. So eliminating ama on a regular basis is important. Ayurveda aggravates regular detoxification to eliminate ama in a process called panchakarma, where toxins are brought into the gut to be eliminated. But of course, this is something that we can't all we don't all have access to. So, but we can do regular fasting, helps to eliminate the ama and helps the digestion. And we'll be talking about spices a bit later on. Ama, along with cleansing, high fiber diet of fresh fruits and vegetables, all help to keep the digestion and eliminate ama.
So let's talk about a daily, you talked about the concept of Dinacharya. So what should we do?
Well, I can't emphasize the importance of natural, regular sleep. It's only in a dreamless sleep, when the mind is in an involuntary mode, that we rest in the inner self. Sleep is a habit linked to the circadian rhythms, which are recognized as doshas in the biosphere. Vata time is between 2 and 6 day and night. Kapha time between 6 and 10 in the morning and evening. And Pitta time between 10 and 2 morning and night. So it's best to get up soon after sunrise, during the Vata time and before Kapha time begins, and go to sleep before 10 during Kapha time and before Pitta begins. Sleep is important for building mental resilience, which is so important during this crisis. It isn't the number of hours that are as important as the value of the sleep that we have. And sleeping during the day should be avoided, as it increases tamas in the mind.
Okay. So let's talk about yoga.
So how do we control the mind so that we can see it? Now, in outer yoga includes rules of social and personal conduct, which help to control negative behaviors causing agitation in the mind. And yoga asana builds flexibility and strength, but more importantly, brings deep awareness of the sensations of the body. Pranayama means control of the breath, and this increases prana, the life force that we talked about earlier, in the mind. Now, inner yoga brings stillness to the mind. Pratyahara means consciously turning off all sensory distractions and focusing the mind internally, and is probably the most difficult thing for most of us to do, and is the beginning of the process. Inner yoga is a process which takes a lot of practice, but once we create this space in the mind, changes begin to happen without us even realizing. And resting in the silence within is a profound experience and helps us to deal with the adversities and stresses that we have going on in our lives, which oftentimes cannot be avoided.
Okay, should we move on to the next one? So you talked about Dinacharya. So let's talk about your diet and lifestyle with Ayurveda.
So what I like about this approach, and this slide gives you a daily practices that could be included. There's one thing that I haven't talked about, which is chanting. Chanting of mantra helps to, if you like, it's a chant or a word in Sanskrit, or it can be in English or whatever it is. If you repeat it over and over and over and over, it starts to erase these scars which are stopping us from seeing the chitta, stopping us from seeing the inner self. I'm sorry, because the scars are on the chitta. And what I like about this approach to mental health is that you don't actually have to know what caused your problem. You only know that there is an issue which has made an impression on the memory. I don't necessarily agree with digging up old skeletons and finding out what we have to blame. My teacher always said that this is just analysis paralysis. My question is, what is gained by this? And I think that it's far better to forgive in your heart, and then you are free from further trauma.
So you say that wake up early in the morning and then have a warm water in the morning. I mean, these are some of the basic things that you recommend on a daily basis to really practice Ayurveda and yoga. Is that what you would say?
These are all daily practices. Hydration is very important, and it's better to take in water first thing in the morning, but it should not be cold. And then to eat a light breakfast in the morning after you've done your daily practices. And then you can have, if you like to have a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, have it after you have eaten.
Okay, so well, what do we need? All of us need is love. That's what we need.
Well, finally, the key component for mental well-being is love. And the most difficult person to love is ourselves. And when we love and respect ourselves, we're able to love and respect others. Life on earth is a vast scheme which is interconnected and balanced. And we can choose to live in harmony with it or follow the desires of the mind. And the ancient philosophy now, of the Vedas, has all the answers for managing mental health in this chaotic world in which we live today.
Okay, so what herbal remedies would you recommend? Now that we know we have to love ourselves, what else can we do?
So now, the herbal remedies that we recommend are called adaptogens. It's a word that you may have heard. And adaptogens help the body to resist the negative effects of stress by modulating the stress hormones and they restore immune function as well. Adaptogens also protect the central nervous system and help to regenerate damaged nerve cells. So adaptogens are important to take as a herbal remedy. And in Ayurveda, we have ashwagandha and shatavari. Ashwagandha is generally recommended for men and shatavari for women. Tulsi is a holy basil, licorice, And also there is a Chinese medicine, ginseng, which I'm sure you've all heard of. We also use Brahmi and Jatamansi, often formulas made of Jatamansi, Brahmi, and Shankapushpi. And Shankapushpi is particularly helpful for sleep. And all of these are suitable for calming the mind. Now, in every day, we can use calming spices, such as nutmeg. And I would just want to say with nutmeg, in order to keep its potency, you should grate it from the nut, not to buy it already ground up, because it loses its potency very easily. And that is a very good adaptogen also for taking at night before you go to bed. Cinnamon is a calming spice, cardamom and saffron. And you can take these herbs, especially at night, in warm milk to help you to go to sleep if you have difficulty in that. And in order to keep the digestive fire so that we keep the ama down, you can use coriander, cumin, fennel, hing, turmeric, ginger, and chili. The hot spices like chili and cayenne pepper are known to be good for depression because they create that fire within us, which helps to improve, fight the tamas in the mind. We have what's called a CCFT, which can be taken through the day. The Agni is also called the microbiome in modern medicine. And all of these digestive spices improve the microbiome. CCFT is cumin, fennel, and coriander seeds in a pot and infused with hot water, and you can make a tea out of that and sip it through the day. And that helps to keep the mind calm, not to be constantly taking stimulants.
Those are very, very helpful tips. So now coming to yoga, what recommendations do you have for yoga?
Now, we don't have time to go over all the postures in this talk today, but what I think is more important is how we practice. Yoga should include, all yoga practice should include coordinated breathing. If it doesn't, it isn't yoga, it's just an exercise practice. Now, when we talk about vata in the mind, that means that there's a lot of movement. So when we're trying to control vata in the mind, practices should be slow and rhythmic and coordinated with the breath. Now, building core strength is good building core strength and flexibility is important for all people, for all doshas. But it's particularly important for vata because the vata constitution tends to be weaker. And of course, conditions which indicate vata, and they are, of course, for conditions which indicate vata in the mind. Vata people tend to have a weaker digestion as well. So postures that require twisting to stimulate the digestive tract, such as the child's pose and the alligator twist, there are several that require twisting. So that all of that stimulates the digestive system. Holding poses for about 3 breaths is good for vata also, particularly for standing poses and forward bends. Now for rajas and pitta conditions, pitta people tend to be very agitated and they have a lot of fire and they have a lot of ambition. And in yoga, they want to get everything really perfect and really advanced and go into these really complicated poses. So for people with high rajas, it's better for them to do a much more slow-paced, coordinating the breath so that you're limiting the intensity of the practice. more complex poses can be done, but they should not be over practiced. And you can do the forward bends and the twists are also beneficial, and to hold poses for a long period of time for Rajasic people, because that helps to calm that fire in the body and mind. Now, for Tamasic people and Kapha people, breathing should be, the practice should be much more energetic, and breathing also should be coordinated in their practice. Their practice should also include more of the inversion postures. Back bends and headstands are good for Tamasic people. Digestion is also weaker in Kapha people and Tamasic people. So forward bends and the child's pose, anything that requires squeezing and twisting the digestive tract also helps for Kapha people.
Okay, so is there any pranayama techniques would you recommend, or I don't know if you have time for you to.
So how much time do we have?
We are at 9:30. We have time. You could spend a couple more minutes.
Actually, I'd like to encourage the audience to think about laughing as being a pranayama. When we laugh, we actually we're not thinking about anything. And during these times of all this sadness and trauma, there doesn't seem to be very much time to find any humor in all of this. So if we can just find every day, just laugh, because during laughter, there is no thought. It's almost like a meditation. So if you would like, I'd just show you what I mean by laughing, and perhaps you can laugh with me. Namaste.